Who would have thought a few years ago that we would be talking about training data and film in the same conversation? We talk a lot about training data, algorithms, and compute power when we talk about AI. But the real decisions that shape AI happen long before the first line of code is written. Our next speaker is here to remind us that every design choice is a values choice. Speed versus safety, efficiency versus empathy, visibility versus invisibility. These aren't abstract trade-offs. They're actually product decisions that compound over time. Our next speaker will explore the hard truths about building AI responsibly. Please welcome senior researcher at Meta, Setor Zilevu.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Setor Zilevu, and today I'm excited to present to you all the human debt in AI. That sound you just heard is the sound of a human heartbeat. Now let's imagine it's your heartbeat, and in that moment you hear the words, "One of your loved ones has just suffered from a stroke." Let that moment stick with you as you're now on the long road to recovery. Your mind begins to race. You start to think, how long will it take for them to recover? How many months or years will this take away from their lives and potentially ours? You start to ask questions like, who will drive them to therapy 3 times a week? What happens if we can't get them there in time, or we miss the appointment? What happens when the hospital is over an hour away? And of course, cost. How much is it going to cost us? How much will insurance cover? And what happens when the bill starts to stack up? 12 million people. That's how many people who suffer from a stroke worldwide each year. If we narrow the scope down to Canada, that's equal to 1 person having a stroke every 5 minutes. See, this creates a lot of challenges for many stroke survivors all across the world. And this includes over 3 to 5 clinic visits per week, hours of traveling, waiting room, scheduling, and logistics, and not to mention months, if not years, of rehabilitation. And this is not a hypothetical. This is the lived reality of millions of stroke survivors every year. And because there are so many stroke survivors, this presents new challenges for therapists. For therapists now, they need to juggle between multiple patients per week, limited time throughout the day to plan for patient recovery, and dealing with fragmented data through multiple sources, portals, and ecosystems, which then can result in having low-quality data. But what if recovery could look different? Let's imagine a world in which we could bring therapy to the home. What if patients had real-time feedback and therapists had real-time data? What if those are systems that allow for patients to do therapy at home without sacrificing quality? A system that tracks progress in real time so therapists can make better decisions with better data. What if we had a system that adapted to exercises based off performance, kind of like having a coach in the room with you 24/7? What would that world look like? We can imagine a world where we have a system that adapts to therapy exercises in real time. It's able to track every repetition, every session, and every gain, and gives therapists actionable data between visits so they can make better decisions before the next appointment and not after. And this is exactly what this patient application tool that you see here is aimed to do. The goal here is to create a more accessible way for patients to receive rehabilitation. And then in short, what it does is it transforms rehabilitation from the hospital into the patient's home by allowing them to mimic the same instructions that happens in the hospital from the comfort of their home. It walks through them a set of instructions that resembles the same feedback that it would get in the hospital, and it kind of mimics the therapist. But then how do we ensure that the feedback that they're receiving is actually very useful? There lies this interface you see here on the screen. The goal of this tool is to create a standardized way for therapists to assess patients, but then also create a computable way for machine learning models to understand how to replicate that. In short, it's aiming to understand the nuance of therapy and move to the granular level of understanding not just what the feedback is, but why it's received. The goal here is to create high-quality data sets that therapists can trust to give feedback to patients so they can focus more on the personal and human connection part of their job, such as the patient recovery process. So let's zoom out for a bit. Typically, when we think of AI systems, we think of high cost, high infrastructure, and a lot of resources. And that typically goes against what we see in traditional human-computer interactions. However, through a framework, we can create a low-cost approach for creating human-centric models that has the ability to help patients and therapists and actually could expand beyond rehabilitation. But through creating these models, we discovered a hidden challenge. And here's what we learned. When you introduce technology, especially in healthcare, you aren't just changing logistics. You're changing the relationship between patient and therapist through technology. And if you're not careful, these systems can then create a way in which the patients become passive. They start to gamify the system just to get the results they need versus seeing real improvements. And then the therapist and then could lose agency. Recovery becomes something that happens to the patient rather than with them. So let's look at traditional healthcare before the age of AI. When we think about human-centered care, it begins with conversation and a shared cognition. When you go to the hospital, you and a therapist or the doctor, you both co-create the meaning. You both are actively thinking, reflecting, and problem-solving together. And in this mode, you're strengthening memory, trust, and agency. Both humans are kept in the loop. And now we're moving into a world in which AI is going to be introduced. And when AI is designed carefully, well-designed AI supports, it doesn't replace. AI offers the ability for us to have real-time data, feedback loops, and precision guidance. In this stage, the patient still moves, the therapist still decides, and AI augments and doesn't dominate. Ideally, in this stage, we still keep the human-to-human bond intact, but yet we're boosting efficiency and insights. This is the sweet spot, reducing unnecessary friction while still keeping the humans cognitively active. But then what happens when we start to rely too much on technology? What are some of the risks that we may see? Well, what we've noticed is that when tech takes the center stage, the human checks out. The therapist's attention shifts from the patient to the screen. The patient is now a data point, disengaged and feels secondary to the system. And this starts to create what we like to call a cognitive debt, which starts to accumulate over time. Do you see, when we think about these insights, they go far beyond stroke rehabilitation. Every system we design either shifts the cognitive load, either towards the human or towards the machine. And when too much thinking is offloaded, there's potential hidden costs of weaker recall, lower engagement, and poor decision-making over time. And let's look at a few other examples. Think about how GPS does our navigating systems for us. We're losing the sense of direction. Or how technology finishes our thoughts, or algorithms decide what to watch next. It's convenient, but there's a hidden cost. Over time, when machines do too much thinking, we check out. How many of you have noticed that throughout this presentation, there has been over 4 typos? If we're not intentional, we design systems that quietly erode the human capability rather than strengthens it. And this is something that we've seen that is aligned with our broader findings in human-computer interactions. When humans are removed from the core decision-making process and creation, engagement and ownership start to decline, leading to weaker motivation and poorer long-term outcomes. But it doesn't need to be that way. And this is where we need a new way about thinking about design. And here's where the Z framework comes in. It's a design framework that ensures AI augments human capabilities, not erases it, by outlining our implicit human knowledge. So what do I mean by that? I'm a huge basketball fan. If I ask you all who the greatest basketball player of all time is, I would hope you all will say Michael Jordan. If you say LeBron James, we maybe be friends. But if I ask you why you think Michael Jordan or LeBron James is the greatest basketball player of all time, you all are going to have different reasons for that. That is because we're all built different. Our own implicit knowledge strengthens and allows us to see the world from different lenses. And here's what these systems are aimed to do. What we've created with the Z framework is a way to reveal that implicit knowledge in a way that strengthens machine learning computations but with the overall goal of improving human intelligence from a very personalized way from how we interact with technology. So how does it work? Everything we just saw, from collaboration to intervention to overload, is a spectrum we control by ACI design. And you can think of the Z framework as the steering wheel and the brakes. So first, we must keep human thinking at the center. This means designing for active recall before reveal. In the space of healthcare, it means we must prompt the clinician and the patients to form hypotheses before the system shows the answer. The goal here is to build memory, judgment, and ownership. Second, we must balance AI's role. AI is a teammate, not the coach. We not only need to understand what it's producing, but how and why. And then we as humans either need to accept, reject, or modify the responses. The goal here isn't speed alone, it's speed with agency. And through this, we can create a way in which we're sustainably improving both human and AI intelligence over time. The goal here is not to fully automate tasks, but semi-automate only after competence is demonstrated to ensure that the human is always in the driver's seat. So everything you've heard so far, from the questions that families have asked, to the systems that were built, to the framework that emerged, it wasn't abstract. If you remember that heartbeat from the beginning of the presentation, that was my heartbeat. Almost 9 years ago, I found out that my father had a stroke, and that completely changed my world. Through then, I've been spending over the last 9 years understanding stroke rehabilitation and how do we create systems to help people in healthcare. By using the Z method that I created, I was able to research, design, and build the apps you saw on the screen. This journey led me to create 2 cyberhuman systems for stroke survivors that extend beyond healthcare. You can apply this in the spaces such as education, retail, and sports. This Z framework has shaped my thinking and the work that I do today. This led to me being recognized by MIT Technology Review as an Innovator Under 35, to me then becoming a professor at NYU, where I created the first course, UX for AI, and now a researcher at Meta focused on how billions of people interact with AI technology today. So before we close today, I want to ask you all one question. If you never struggle to think again, what kind of world would you inherit? And what kind of world would you leave behind? Because the systems we build today will determine whether we sharpen human judgment or quietly let it fade away. Thank you.